Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm still giving our audience another 30 seconds or so to join us, but it's a pleasure to welcome you to this seminar organized by the European Livestock Voice. And today we will discuss an extremely topical issue. We will discuss the farm to fork strategy. And we know that there are several studies which have recently been published about the impact the farm to fork strategy may have on agriculture in general and on the livestock sector in particular. Now, before we go into the heart of the matter, just a couple of practical points. We have only 1 hour, so that is a very tight timing, and we definitely want to keep a good 15 minutes for exchanges with you, our audience, at the end. So you are very welcome to send your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will be answering them at the end of the session. We're probably not going to be able to answer all the questions, but we're going to do our best. In order to ensure we do have those 15 minutes, I would like to ask our speakers to please stick to your allocated speaking time. Try not to go over. And if you do go over for too long, I'm afraid I'm going to have to interrupt you just to make sure there's a balanced speaking time, but also some time for our audience. If you would like to tweet about our session today, we have a hashtag. We're going to be using the hashtag of the European Livestock Voice. It's hashtag meat the facts. Meat as in the meat that you eat. So M-E-A-T, the facts in one word. Now, let's go into the topic of the day. And the farm to fork and the biodiversity strategies aim for a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food system. They also want to preserve food affordability. They want to generate a fair economic return for everyone. And yet, to many, certainly in the agriculture and livestock sector, the approach proposed to achieve these goals will have opposite effects on several parts of the agri-food chain. The livestock sector is particularly worried. And as the European Parliament prepares to vote on these proposals, today we will be hearing about the findings of 2 specific studies that have been carried out, impact studies, and we'll also be hearing about the discussions that are currently held in the European Parliament. And in order to take us through this Parliament aspect of things, I would like to invite our first speaker to join us. I'm very happy to welcome Ms. Ann Sander, member of the European Parliament from the EPP group. She's also an active member of the Agri Committee. Ms. Sander, good morning. Now, I don't see the right speaker on my screen. I see your slide, but I see one of our scientists. I'd like to see Ms. Sander, if that's possible. Yes, there we are. Hello, good morning, Ms. Sander. And
good morning.
Ms. Sander, there have, as I was saying in my introduction, several studies have recently been published, and they show a potential negative, in fact, impact of farm to fork on the agri sector in the EU. What's your reaction? What's your take on all that?
First, I would like to invite me to take part in this event. I would also thank the authors of these studies, which in the absence of the proper impact assessment carried out by the Commission are the only ones able to shed some light on the cumulative impact of this strategy and of the biodiversity strategy on the agro-food sector. We have been asking for more than a year for such an impact assessment, and for more than a year, I have been consistent with the principle that the green transition of agro-food sector is necessary and must be steered and accompanied by our public policies. This said, targets and objectives must be science-based, and we cannot come from nowhere without any proper assessment. I must convey my disappointment and even, I must say, anger before the behavior of the Commission. The European Commission, after having tried to discredit the study from the USDA and to downplay the result of its own research center, told us on Monday in the Agriculture Committee that carrying out a cumulative impact assessment would be a burden for the Commission's services. Deputy Director General also declared that having focused for years on economic and social development of the agriculture sectors and the rural areas, it was about time to shift the focus entirely on our environmental and climate action. First, one could strongly focus that our common agriculture policy has had on environment. The last 3 reforms have been done to green this policy. Secondly, this unbalanced focus will come at a price. Thanks to the different studies that have been carried by renewed university and that will be presented to us today, we have first ideas of the trends that the farm to fork could create: decline in production, higher prices for consumers, higher costs, and greater constraint for our farmers. I deplore above all the potential drop in production caused in this strategy, which could lead to weakening our continent's food sovereignty. In addition, the paradox clearly showed by the study from the University of Kiel is that such a dreadful impact on our sectors and on our rural areas would only lead to a modest, if not inexistent, environmental impact and reduction in greenhouse gases due to the impact of imported greenhouse gases. My feeling is that the European Commission, in a certain way, willing to export our European produced emission far away from our eyes by ourselves a virtuous environmental image. More so, this would have the potential to destabilize international markets. This will introduce change in consumption patterns, but they have not yet taken place and they are difficult to anticipate. We should, however, avoid a dual food system where the more modest of the European consumers will have no other choice than eating low quality imported food products with the climate footprint that we know. They should not be the victim of a policy decided from above and designed for those who will have the means to eat expensive and better quality products. For me, it is necessary to keep food accessible to as many people as possible. By taking part in this meeting, I wish to hear the content of studies which are essential to help members of the European Parliament to make decisions when knowing what impact our vote will have. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to now hear the authors of the study. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Sander. And indeed, we will hear now the views, the outcomes of the studies of 2 of them, at least, from the scientists who carried them out, or who were part of the teams that carried them out. And I would like to first turn to Professor Christian Henning from the Kiel University. And Christian carried out a study on behalf of the Grain Club Alliance and some crop sector associations So Christian, what are your key findings in your study? What particular angles did you look at and what came out of that research? I don't see you, but I'm sure I'm going to see you very, very shortly. Yes, there we are. Good morning,
So,
Christian.
I'm sorry, Florence, I'm just answering now, or I should already use my slides? Okay, so I'm going now
Go
to
ahead. Yes.
my presentation. Okay, great. So then, yes, the main findings, or let's start with what we actually did. I mean, this farm to fork strategy, which is the major mechanism how the Commission wants to implement the Green Deal goals into agriculture, and basically has 5 different measures, in which you can see on the left open corner, which is the first one would be a reduction of at least 20% in the use of mineral fertilizer, a reduction of at least 50% of pesticide, a reduction of 50% in the nitrogen pollution, or in the balance of nitrogen, and then at least a use of 10% of the total agriculture area as set aside, and at least 25% of organic farming. These are the 5 measures, and this have been implemented using a model, a European-wide model, the CAPRI model, which is the major model the Commission is using in itself. It's developed by University of Bonn, which was our partner here, and now it's a huge network of scientists who work with this model. Now, major intervention logic, and these are the results, is all of these measures, which we can also, and we did simulate as a complete package, which is the red one. I will mainly refer to this one. Now, these are production restrictions. And so because of this restriction, of course, supply and production will go down. And basically, this is sharp, as you see, for all the measures. And we have a 20% roughly production decline in beef and pork, and also in cereals and oilseeds, and a little less in dairy production, and also fruit and vegetables. Now, the different measures, I will not go into detail, but one major result is that the main impact is really with the 50% reduction in nitrogen pollution compared to all the other measures. This is the major impact of the farm to fork strategy as it is now. Because of the supply decline, logically, farm prices are going to increase. And these are quite high for specific circumstances related to how the trade really works around these agriculture markets in Europe. And so we have a very high increase in domestic farm prices, which is up to 58% for beef, roughly 50% for pork, 35% for milk, and a little less, or significant less, but still significant for crop production, around 12 up to 20% cereal and oilseed. Now, this price reaction comes, of course, from the logic of trade, and because of the production declines. So trade is basically also significantly changed. What we observe for all the commodities is that we have a decline in net exports. And of course, depending on the net export position of the European Union, this can be like for beef or cereals, that we actually come from a net export position of the European Union because of farm to fork to a net import position. This is beef and cereals, but it can also be that we remain a net exporter like for pork or dairy, but that these net exports are sharply declining. So this is another impact, and which is also important for the evaluation of the complete study, is also the farm gate prices basically in the EU, the domestic prices, show a hard or a sharp increase. This is not the case for the non-EU prices on the international market, and this is why we contrast this here. So if you compare this, we have for most non-EU prices, farm prices again, commodity prices, which are increasing below 10%. Now, these complete changes have an impact, of course, on welfare, mainly on welfare in the agriculture sector. And one thing what we see here is that farm income in total, if we have the complete measure, are really increasing by something like roughly 30%, which is altogether 35 billion euros. And this just comes from the fact that the production decline, which we observe, is overcompensated by the induced price impact. But this is asymmetrically between crop producers and animal producers. Basically, despite this price increases, and we don't see that the production decreases are overcompensated for crop producers. We only see this for animal producers, and especially beef fattening and milk, where we observe this. So there is a heterogeneous picture between the farmers. Now, agro-processing industry is also, and also agro-trade, agricultural trade, heavily impacted by the farm to fork strategy, but negatively, which is logical because simply the volume of the business is going down and they don't observe compensating high price increases because consumer prices are, of course, much less increasing compared to farm gate prices. And so agro-processing is losing, and we particularly looked on dairy industry, processing industry, which make a loss with total farm to fork of roughly 4 billion euros. And then other processing, which is mainly oilseed processing, make another 4 billion euros loss if we implement the complete picture. Now, the other thing, what we did compared to many other studies, we also looked on the impact on the ecosystem services. And here we observe, this is the last slide, and again, I concentrate on the complete package farm to fork, that there are clear impacts and positive impacts for all of the 3 ecosystem services we looked at. So biodiversity, nitrogen pollution, and greenhouse gas emissions. Now, the major effect is blue here, is on nitrogen pollution, which is as planned, heavily and effectively decreased by 50%. So it's not true that there are no effects. There are clear effects and very positive effects for nitrogen pollution. And we have not so high effects in the European Union on greenhouse gases and biodiversity. And greenhouse gases are especially problematic due to 2 things. First, LULUCF sectors, so there are land use changes which counteract the positive impact on reduction in emissions in agriculture. And the second thing is because of the trade reactions, we have a shift of production into non-EU countries, and there we have the so-called leakage effect, so additional greenhouse gas emissions in non-EU countries. So in terms of greenhouse gases, farm to fork is really not very much effective. Now, summing up,
Christian, I'm afraid I'm going to have to cut you short.
The last sentence, summing up, the study shows a clear, very positive potential of the Green Deal, but in the farm to fork strategy as it is implemented or foreseen now, this potential is only used roughly for 13%, so that could be done much more. And the major challenges to the policies is we need to find an efficient policy implementation, what so far the farm to fork measures suggested don't do, and then we have to deal with leakage effect, with the land use change, and the last thing, which is very important, we might come in the
that was already the last thing, I'm afraid.
Political feasibility, which means that the benefits and the cost have to be in a justice way and distributed across consumers and farmers, and especially farmers, I think, need here, because they are taking the risk, some further support and incentives to really implement this sustainable production. Thank you very much. Sorry for the...
Thank you, Christian. Yes, I mean, we love enthusiasm, and as a moderator, I love enthusiastic speakers, but you know, as I said, we have
yes, I perfectly understand. I apologize.
No problem. No problem. Roel, now, so it's a pleasure to invite Professor Roel Jongeneel from the Wageningen University and Research. And he will be sharing with us the outcome of a study that was carried out about the impact of farm to fork and the biodiversity strategy, which was commissioned by associations from the EU livestock value chain. So Roel, please, over to you.
Thank you for the invitation. Next slide, please. let me start to make some introductory remarks. Our study is not a detailed modeling study, but it is actually, we call it a policy assessment or a policy brief study. So it has a focus on more quantitative assessment. However, what I think the key contribution of our study is that it tries to assess the impacts for livestock farmers, the income impacts especially. As Ms. Sanders was already saying, that there was, we were very interested to study this because there was a lack of, say, an ex-ante impact assessment of the Commission, although over the summer the JRC study has been published, and we have also made an assessment of that study and used information from that study as an analysis. So what we do in our study is actually, it's built from three components. It starts with an assessment of looking at the farm to fork and biodiversity strategy policy objectives, and look, where are we now? Where are we intend to go? And is this feasible? What measures have to be taken to achieve this? And say our main conclusion there is that in particular the nutrient loss reduction and it is an important one, and climate, say, a next one, which has the most impacts probably on the sector to achieve these objectives. Then we have a second component where we try, based on the studies which are available, to assess, get a number of, say, inputs on market conditions, on moreover on policy environment, and say farm-specific issues, where we try to make a set of assumptions which we can use to simulate, say, the impacts on farm income. Now, for doing this simulation, what we did, we made a detailed assessment of the farm structure in the EU, at least, and we selected, say, 13 farm types. It's a limited study, 13 farm types, which cover the heterogeneity of agricultural production in terms of locations, so different member states, in terms of farm specialization and farm size, in terms of also, say, farming conditions, in terms of soil conditions. Based on that, we use the FADN data from the farm accountancy system. Based on that, we made a kind of a calculation tool which allowed us to impose the shocks of the policies, and then we could assess the impacts on the income. So that's what we did. And this slide gives you a short introduction into our findings. And what we see that in 5 of the 11 cases, or 13 cases of we saw that the incomes results were positive, and a number of other ones they were negative. So you could say half more or less half positive, half in half of the cases it's negative. What you see is then, if you are starting to look, why is our farming incomes positive? That's what also Professor Henning was already saying. It's because, in particular, in the livestock sector, you see quite some strong price increases combined with some limited declines in production, or at least less than proportional declines in production, which in the end can have a positive impact, in particular for the beef and the pig sectors. And that's driving also the positive income impact. You see also sectors where, particularly in the dairy sector, where we think the income impacts will be less positive or negative. What we also see is that, say, these results are sensitive to the margins farmers make, and in particular, when you look at the intensive livestock sector in general, the margins are the margin to, say, product to feed prices are low, so they are sensitive to that. But the extreme price increases for the beef, and particularly beef and pork prices, make that this is overcompensated. What we also then see is that, say, the environmental and climate hotspots have a higher probability to face negative farm income effects. And that's maybe not that strange, but that's because there you see the adjustments farmers have to make will be the largest. Maybe we can go to the next slide. So what you see here is that we did 2 sensitivity analyses, and the one is related to the prices, because these extreme price increases for pigs and beef, we found them probably too extreme. We had interactions also with market experts, and they think that they are probably overstated. So So that's an uncertainty. The second reason is that the modeling study, so the Kiel study, for example, and the JOC study and the USDA study give different price estimates. So there's uncertainty on the price estimates. And thirdly, an important thing is that all the studies which are so far available don't consider the impact of, say, consumer changing diets and also the change in food waste, a reduction in food waste. If you would add these things to the story we have already, what you would expect is that it could lead to a decline in the demand for, say, animal products, and as such then could have a negative impact on or a lower impact on the prices. So for that reason, we in our first sensitivity analysis, we simulated again the income impacts, but then with a more modest increase in prices, so an increase by maximum of 15%. And for dairy, where the JOC study has a very low price increase, there we highlighted it to 15%. And what you see then is that, on general, there are two things there. I think the first is that on average, then farmers will, the farm cases we analyzed will experience a negative income decline. So the net part from in the beginning positive shifts to a net decline. And secondly, what you see is that the distribution is changing. In general, dairy farmers are increasing their position, and say intensive livestock farmers are declining their position. Maybe can I give the next slide or the next thing? We did a second sensitivity analysis, which is, oh sorry, maybe still the previous one. Sorry. We did a second sensitivity analysis with respect to that farmers have to bear the cost for themselves, because what you see in the JOC study, where we borrowed several of the material from as an input from, is that you see that they assume that the farmers will voluntarily adopt a lot of the measures they have to be taken. So due to they will get financial incentives to do this. So which would mean that they, by adopting these measures, they will have certain costs, but the government, the policy support is covering these costs. So the net income impact on the farmers will be relatively low. However, what's not clearly indicated, at least as I'm aware of in the JOC study, is how much additional budget this will cost. And do we have this budget? So what we did in a second sensitivity analysis, we made an assessment of what could these measures that are suggested, what could they cost to the farmer? And if you would put the burden of these costs on the farmer themselves, how will the situation change? And what we then found is that the income effects of farmers will further worse, maybe even with a 20 percentage point step. Now, I would like to close by this, but with one qualifying statement. What we did not do in our study, that was not beyond the scope, is that we could adjust for the farm structural change in the farm sector. Now, what you see if you look at the past is that one way to mitigate negative impacts on their income, one strategy farmers often followed is increasing their scale. And that dynamics has not been really included. So it could be that our results give a bit an overestimation. However, we would say that if farmers have to increase their scale, it has as a mirror side or a downside, often that other farms have to exit the business. And also is that what I can say is that no other study which is currently available has taken this structural change, I think, into account. With that, I would like to, maybe I can then make one final remark about the
very final one then, please.
Yeah, in terms of what I see as an important thing for the policies, you see the variation in income effects. This goes down also, goes in parallel with places where the challenges are the largest, so the environmental hotspots in the European community. So what is important, I think, that we have tailored policies addressing these specific regions, and the new delivery model of the CAP, I think, offers opportunities to go into this, but it requires efforts indeed from both the policy and the farmer side to work on this. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Roel. So let me get back to Ms. Sander now. I mean, you gave your point of view in the beginning, but now that we've heard a little more in detail the outcome of two of the studies we've been talking about, what do you think as a policymaker, how do you consider these studies and what we learned from them? Ms. Sander? Yeah, there we are.
Yes, thank you for for all these elements. And of course, these elements confirm that we have to take into account all this information when organizing our policies, and all this information, we didn't have this information. So it's important for the Commission to go further and to have a more large view, because of course, this will have an impact, and an important impact for the agriculture, but also for the consumer, and have impact also outside of the European Union. Or we have this responsibility as political, as policy makers, we have this responsibility. So we need to take into account all these elements in all the legislations, in all the proposals, the political proposals that the Commission will do in the framework of farm to fork and biodiversity. But I would like to thank, because it's very precise and very important for us as policy makers. But we are not alone, the Parliament. And so Commission and Council, also the Council, because all this information should also go to the national parliaments, because then the Council has also to take account of all this information.
Thank you. Now to both Roel and Christian, clearly from what you have explained, your methodologies, the methodologies that you used for your studies are different, and yet there are common trends in the results and in the outcome. So how do you explain that, and where do you agree, and how did that work? Maybe starting with Christian?
Okay, yes, I think, this is what you expect from science. If you are modeling some empirical phenomena, then of course it would be good if you could come to an agreement how this will be in empiric. So I think this is what you expect from science. Now, basically it's the same intervention logic. I don't want to repeat this, which is behind this. And then of course, one has to say this, and this is what we also see, the intervention logic is the same, and so basically qualitatively the outcomes are the same, like price increase, and we don't want to repeat all this, but of course depending on the specific model in quantity, and this can change a little bit. We have some higher price effect, and Roel has some lower price effect, and this is exactly what it is, to give the message. There is some uncertainty on this. How high will the prices be? How high will income changes be? Who's going to win, who's going to lose, basically, and this depends on very specific empirical constellations, which can be captured but not perfectly captured in these models. So there are some variants, but the main messages are clear, and I like to emphasize here again, I mean, yes, there is a high impact, and there is a high impact on farmers, definitely. There is a high impact on total society, but the major impact is a net benefit for the society. Okay, we don't want to forget this. It can be higher, much higher, that's my point, and it can be done much better than at the moment, but the net benefit from our study is clearly there. And I think it's the same. I mean, Roel did not mention, and I think they didn't do it, the ecosystem services, the evaluation of this. But if you take this into account, I'm pretty sure he agrees. The major message is, it is a net benefit, full stop.
Roel, I could see nodding.
Yes, I agree with the remarks made by my German colleague on this. What I think is that what is important, of course, is that we also we have a bit more qualitative assessment, but we also included, say, market experts to check outcomes. That's why we do also what guided us in the way we say developed our our scenarios and sensitivity analysis. What is, I think, important, maybe a remark to add. So I agree with that we do these policies to address some key challenges, and in that sense, and they are effective in doing that. So I agree with this benefits. And what the other thing is, what I would like to add is that farmers are part of the solution. So we need also them to contribute to these things, and they can. Yeah, that's what is shown from these assessments. But what we try to add with, I think, what I learned from our study is that what we see is that yes, they can. But it needs a proper tailoring of policies, and also having these regionally diversified in a way so that farmers are really contributing to these things. And this is especially a challenge with the hotspots in the EU. So that needs a tailored approach, I think, and that you need it not only to compensate to avoid, say, negative income impacts on farmers, but also to have them contributing to deliver these environmental services. Let me say it in that way. Thanks.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Sander, I know you have to leave very soon, so I'd like to just ask you a quick final question, and if possible, we've heard that there would be a price increase, and both the GRC study and the Kiel study show that livestock prices are those that should increase the most. So definitely, if that is the case, there will be consequences also, not just on the income of livestock farmers, but also on consumer prices and on trade. So what's your take on that?
I'm sorry, if you can just repeat your question. My English is not so
that's okay.
To react.
That is okay, no problem. So what do you think of the impact that the price increase would have on consumer prices and on trade?
Yes, for consumer, this is also a question that we have to take into account, because the risk is to have a split society, as I said it, with people who are able to buy the good products, and people who cannot do it. This is one of the risk. And then on the international trade, it will also, of course, have an impact. Huh?
And one final one, because I don't know if you have a couple more minutes or if you have to leave now.
I should leave at midday, because we have to take a
just
flight.
2 minutes of your time. You have to catch a flight, yes, so we don't want you to miss your flight. To what extent, in one sentence, to what extent do you think that farm to fork can be considered a climate policy?
How it can be?
Yes.
I think the idea to reduce the intrant, to reduce pesticide and so on. Of course, this is a good idea, and I agree totally. And this will, of course, help to be a climate policy. But this has to be with supporting the farmer. You cannot just have some objectives very with constraint, but without having this support. And for the farmer, we need also to work on more innovative technologies to help farmers, which do already a lot to capture more carbon, to organize a more circular economy on their farm. so all these things have to be supported, have to be studied to go further on, to be really more innovative. And if Farm to Fork can foresee some legislation to go in this sense, then of course it can be a good strategy. There are a lot of things which are good in this strategy, but at the same time, you have a lot of things who go in a bad sense. And until now, we have also to say that a lot of interrogations stay. And so we have really to continue to work and to be not dogmatic, but to have some policies which are based on science. This is probably the main important thing.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Sander, and have a safe trip. And thanks for joining us this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. So I will turn back to you, gentlemen, but I will start taking questions from our audience because we have been receiving quite a few already. Let me start with the first one, which is a little more specific about farming practices. What's your opinion on the Commission's role in deciding how animals should be farmed, for instance, a more organic farming and so on? That's more of a political statement. So I don't know if you want to embark on this. I would have loved to ask this question to Ms. Sander, but she's left. So would you like to comment on that, Roel?
Yeah, maybe to add is that it's a bit beyond the scope of our assessment, and so we focused on animal production, and the organic farming objective is mainly focused, say, on the share of agricultural cropland, which should be 25% of for use for organic production, which does not directly translate into animal production. So that's at least an observation we made, and in our report we elaborate a bit on this. So I have not a specific statement, say a political conviction on this. I think that's for the politicians, but at least for our assessment, I can say this. Thanks.
Christian, would you like to say something about how the Commission considers, how the Commission decides on the way animals should be farmed? For instance, more organic farming for animals, breeding techniques, and so on.
Yes, I was just writing a comment on this, but now to all, yes, I think that definitely we also argue in the end of our study that it's much more effective and efficient instead of focusing on specific production technologies like organic farming. It's definitely better to focus on the specific ecosystem service targets and then give incentives that farmers are delivering this, like reduction in nitrogen pollution or in greenhouse gases. And particular organic farming, we did take into account this measure, and it shows that it is not rather effective in many ways. It's not very effective in reducing nitrogen pollution because, you know, the major problem comes from organic manure, in fact, and so organic farming does not restrict in any way organic fertilizer like manure, so it does not contribute very much to this. So in any way, whatever it is always much better, even if there are some technologies, if you now promote them, they have a positive impact. But it's always better to focus on exactly what you want, and these are the economic system services, and then give incentives to farmers to produce it. And by the way, incentives, this is also important in that they can really benefit from, also profit from the benefits to total society is if you really pay for this ecosystem services, like using permit systems. And this is exactly what we favor in our study.
Right, and Roel, actually on something which derives a little bit from that, another question, on what are you basing the positive farm income for pork in particular? Is that due to the higher value of organic meat?
No, it's mainly about it's mainly driven by the high projected price increases for pork in the conventional market. Let me say it in that way. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
What we think are, and also we are interacting with market experts, which we think are overestimated. So we think that they, in the long run, these price increases of 40% or more are probably not sustainable.
Okay. Now, we talked earlier a little bit, and that's something that you touched upon as well, but that Ms. Sander mentioned, the import aspect, the trade aspect. And we have some viewers wondering about the fact that if we import food, how can we ensure high quality levels? I mean, we know that the EU is trying to lead in terms of practices and hopes that its partners are going to follow up. So if we import food, how do we ensure high quality levels, and how can that support our producers' competitiveness? Who'd like to start on this? Christian, yes, I see you reacting there.
First thing, one reason why we observe this in the first glance counterintuitive development of domestic prices and non-EU prices for the seemingly same commodity. If you compare this, for example, for beef, it is almost 60% increase in EU, and it's only 7% increase in non-EU, right? For the same thing, basically. So this is exactly because these things are not homogeneous, and one thing is related to quality, right? So this is exactly why the trade and why these price effects, we observe this, because it's not so easy to substitute for exactly this reason. So basically, the mechanism, this very specialized value change, especially in livestock, already take care that's exactly that they deliver the quality the consumer is used to. So this is the one thing. And the second thing, if we're talking about pork, then we should also see, I mean, even the trade is of course relatively heterogeneous, so it depends on what is imported. But even if we now take the complete import, then there is a big shift, I mean, a reduction in net export. But basically, if you reduce the net export, then this means that your domestic market, you stay as an exporter, is not touched by this, right? So I don't see that this is very much in danger by what we observe, okay? For two reasons. First, we have this narrow and specialized value change. They take care that they deliver the quality, and this is why we don't see so big substitution effects. And second, as long, especially in pork, as you stay as a net exporter, even taking the farm to fork shop into account, then of course the domestic quality is not touched.
Roel, I could see you nodding and listening very carefully to Christian's comments.
Yes, maybe to add one thing, because I think on the trade aspects, the Kiel study is much more detailed than our study, which focused more on the farm incomes and the farms side. But say a more generic remark, of course, is that, and that's what you also see from the JRC study, that when you would like, for example, to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and when you would see that, say, if you reduce with 3 units, 2 units will be generated in addition outside the EU, that leakage effect, that's either it on the one hand, it makes your policy effort less effective, and at the same time, I think in terms of a kind of a fairness, it is something that you say, okay, if we ask from our farmers to make a number of efforts to increase the sustainability of that production process, we should actually have a kind of equivalent standard, say, for products which are going to enter the community, because otherwise, I think it is it's not a fair treatment. So that and that would also then help to maybe to adopt in other areas which are exporting to us that they adopt the same type of standards.
Right. And
I would like to add to this, yes? If I may. I think this is now exactly where our criticism comes, how these things are implemented. I think this is all okay if you assume that these things are implemented in terms of regulation. But if they are implemented in terms of that the society is going to pay for ecosystem services, then of course this doesn't matter anymore, right? Because then the European farmers have a great market the non-European farmers don't have, right? Because they can sell ecosystem services. And this is exactly what is also possible if we would do this over a permit system, for example. And then this competitive disadvantage is in fact a competitive big advantage of EU farmers because they have the market for ecosystem services and they can make the money. And this is definitely possible. And this is exactly what we are suggesting. Second thing, the leakage effect is there, but you have to look at this dynamically. One way to get out of the leakage effect, it's just a technological problem. Basically, we want to produce ecosystem services and conventional farm products. At the moment, we cannot do this very effectively. So basically, to do more of ecosystem services, we have to go very down in conventional farming. That's what the study shows. But dynamically, we are so smart people. We can develop technologies, right? So we can induce technological process. Many things are already there, not in practice, but in science. And once we implement this, then we of course get rid of the leakage effect. And now, how do we get there? We need incentives. How do we get incentives? We need higher prices. For what? For what we need, ecosystem services. And this is exactly why we need to implement this, despite of the leakage effect, because in a dynamic way, this way, the European Union, and I make the bet that this will be less than 10 years, will get rid of this leakage effect because it will catch up and producing smart, sustainable food. And this is what we need. We need the right incentives. And if we stop now by saying, oh, this is the leakage effect, we just go in the wrong direction. And the next thing is smarter societies will come to this and then we are going to import the stuff. That's exactly what happens.
Right, so point is taken. Let's meet again in 10 years and see where we stand. I think your message was very clear. But actually, you talked about that transition, and you both mentioned the fact that the agriculture sector, farmers in particular, are going to need support. Now, could we consider having a private financing to help this transition? Could that be a solution?
What do you mean by private financing? Sorry.
I suppose from the private sector as opposed to the European Union, for instance.
Okay, so my opinion to this is pretty clear. What we definitely need is we need incentives for farmers and for the complete sector to really invest in this innovative technology and to deliver this ecosystem services. And the best is by really paying for this. And of course, the one who benefits from this is the society and now the consumers, of course. So these are the ones who are going to pay. Because it's not so easy, it's not an easy market. I mean, you cannot do this in a private market, right? You cannot market ecosystem services. And so the only way to do this is over policy framework. And this is exactly like permit systems. So the public have to pay for these ecosystem services. And of course, there might be, for example, if you have a permit market, then investments, private investments, going to pay in smart technologies because you get these returns from the permit market. This definitely you can trigger private investment, but for getting there, you need a public framework which is going to make sure that farmers and everyone who produces ecosystem services is paid by this. And that's exactly what the society wants because they really demand this. And if they don't demand it, they are not going to pay it, but then that's what we don't need.
Rule.
And yeah, if I can add to this, I think what I see is that maybe two ways I think the private sector can be involved in this. One is in terms of this is really the direction which you are going with agriculture, and that we also have the regulations and the policies in this direction in a consistent way. What you then see is I think that investment from the private sector, also from the input suppliers and processing sector and innovations will be targeted in this direction. And then what I expect is that there is a lot more possible than we can foresee now. So I think this innovation direction will be really very helpful to help also to make the transition. The second thing is that I think that for parts of this transition, it could be that you have, say, if you take certain environmental measures and you it is a way to distinguish your product quality from other products. So if you think of the kind of true price literature, it is suggesting that also there are groups of consumers which are prepared to pay for sustainable products from certain origins and ways. So probably from the market you can get, at least for certain niches, you can get a contribution which can help as an enabler to pursue this policy. And let me then make also another remark in the direction of Mr. Henning, is that, of course, I agree with him, and that's a typical our economist perspective on this ecosystem service market. So the importance of that, and that's going to move things. So I recognize his story. The only thing is that what I think is that I'm a little bit less optimistic at the moment, that because we have to develop this market really and make it really a priority, so that it will help the farmers to get a new earning model under their farm and move in this direction. And so that we have, I think, a long way still to go.
There's another aspect, sorry, there were a very quick point then, Christian, because I'd like to, okay. So there's another aspect that we briefly touched upon earlier on, and that I'd like to come back to. It is the fact that there's been criticism about the existing studies, and I mean all of them in general, that they don't really consider the expected change in diet by consumers. That is something that, or is that something that a dimension that you could take into account in your models, that as well as the fact that there's likely to be taxes to accompany this shift in demand. So how do you fit that into an economic model? How can we expect that consumers are going to shift their diets? Or is it wishful thinking? Christian, yes?
So first, our study did include this as a changing condition. So we included what will happen only technically, of course. We just assumed there is a shift and away from meat consumption in the baseline, and then we look what would be the impact on the farm to fork strategy. And one thing is there are interesting impacts. For example, the leakage effect is extremely reduced by this. Which is logical, of course. And second, of course, it is an interesting question, and it's a challenging question. How can we change the diets? I mean, the first reason is, do we want to change the diets against the welfare of the consumers, which could also be done? Or do we think we have to change the diets in favor of the welfare? What I mean is, if we take health into account, and then of course there are some nutrition studies showing that for a healthy diet we should at least tendenциally reduce meat consumption, of course not to zero. And so now if we take this into consideration, I think this is another challenge for policy, because the traditional instruments like putting taxes or subsidies, so basically giving price incentives, will not work so easily. So then we have to go into more innovative things like nudging, thinking about how we can really change habits, how we can really transfer knowledge about healthy diets to the consumers, which is also a big challenge. But of course, these challenges should not hold us up for going into the right direction. So, but this definitely needs further research and deep thinking how to solve it.
Yeah, and Roel, I saw your comment, but is it only about bio products, or is it just something else? Is it just the fact that people are ready or not ready to change the way they eat, traditions, etc.?
We did some work at Wageningen to assess this impact, and what we see there, what you see also already in quite in the market outlook world. So what you see already some shifts in diets happening, but it goes at a very, say, slow change maybe. But and what you see, for example, in the number of people, if you look to the number of vegetarians, if you look to the number of people flexitarians, which say have some meatless days a week, then you see really changes in trends. And we also assessed it that in the different member states it's different, but I think we can already, based on that, if you prolong that, you see already there is quite some dynamics coming into the market, but I'm not sure whether how far this will go. Maybe one other point to add to this discussion, because I completely agree with Mr. Henning that we need more research on this. And one thing which is questioned then sometimes me is that I think we often have a discussion on meat consumption in terms of health aspects and footprint, and in itself that's understandable. But what it could be interesting to have a closer examination of how, say, footprint relates to the nutritional properties of the specific products we have. Yeah? Because if you express the footprint, say, from the, I think dairy products, for example, are quite nutritional and have also a place in a proper diet. It could be interesting to see, because what I see from some of these diet studies, say if you would, for example, consume less meat, and I see the remark made by my colleague, and I've seen that also, that it might, at least for the country where I come, it might be healthier for people to consume a bit less meat. What you then see is that if they are going to replace meat for some other, say, bad products, it could not contribute so much to their health than when they would. So the diet is really a thing of it's not of a specific individual product, but it's a complete say menu which you have to do. And I think that needs much more research. And I'm not an expert on that, but I have the feeling that we should be analyze this in a careful way.
Lots of work ahead then, and much more material for research. Gentlemen, I would like to thank you very much for joining us this morning. We've reached our time slot. I understand that the links to both your studies are going to be posted on the website of the European Livestock Voice, which you can find at Meet the Fact, in one word, meetthefacts.eu. There will also be a video highlighting the impact studies, the outcome of the impact studies, posted on that same website later on. So stay tuned. I'm sure you will find it also on the Livestock Voice Twitter account. So more to be seen. Thank you all. Thank you to our three speakers. Thank you all for following us. I'm sure that the discussion will continue, in particular with the Commission's conference coming up over the next couple of days. So continue being so passionate, and thank you very much for being with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, stay safe, and that's it from us for now. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Last remark from my side, there are many questions not answered, and yes, I'm happy if you send me an email to answer these questions. I cannot go in the chat, sorry.
We'll keep them to make sure our audience gets the answer. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.